the intention of this is that we figure out a podcast that is geared to Asian expat dads that
Big market. It's a huge market.
huge market now. Asian, maybe not necessarily Asian expat dads, maybe third culture dads. Like you're raising your child,
Yeah.
and a family.
Yeah. We're not like young, but we're not old.
Yeah.
We've got kids. Many of us have kids. We are kind of halfway between all these different worlds.
Yeah.
Right, to a degree. Because like I know you're from the U.S. and I'm from the U.S. but we're also Asian from the U.S. and so we're not necessarily entirely from like the
place that we're.
Yeah, I guess my experience is that like although I grew up in the West, like I'm not like my experience isn't limited to just the West. It's always through the lens of like an East Asian like immigrant Chinese family household, and so I think. To me, those dynamics are really kind of like paradoxical to the dynamics I experience here in Hong Kong in that like I look like everyone here now, but I'm like not like everybody here now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, I think that's one of the unique things about living in Hong Kong, especially with, I mean, I think because you are, of Hong Kong descent, that it changes people's expectations of you, I think, for sure. But I think another of, the English factor, I think, is an interesting one, right? Because
yeah, for sure. I think in some ways, being in Asia, in Hong Kong in particular, and like primarily using Chinese and only Chinese, like we can't ignore that it exists, that Chinese is like the common spoken language, but in some ways it insulates us, in some ways it limits us in terms of like our social circles or like where, you know what I mean, like where we meet, but at the same time it gives us access to like a lot of different types of people who are also kind of in the similar boat where they're like maybe not necessarily originally from Hong Kong or some kind of mix in between there. And so I've always loved that about Hong Kong. In fact, I'm going to miss it a lot when I move. So,
I mean, it's different for sure. Like if we think about Hong Kong, I mean, I've been in Hong Kong for 18 years.
Old enough to drive, old enough to vote.
I can vote as a permanent resident, right? Can I vote? I don't know.
I think you can.
I can vote, actually.
Wait, it depends on. Yeah, you're a permanent resident now, so
I've been a permanent resident for 11 years, right? So it's 18 years here after 7 years. You can vote, but then your choices are district
based,
and then there's only one choice.
I've never actually. I had the ID that I landed with was called the RO ID, and so it wasn't like the 3-star. Like even though my parents were born here, I got a different kind of ID. RO, yeah, right to abode.
Oh.
Abode starts with an A. I don't know why it's called an RO, but it's the right to land, right to work without a visa. But I can't vote. And I also think that I wasn't allowed to buy property within back when we still had stamp duty. I think I was still subject to those rules. So I didn't need a visa to come here. That was one of the reasons why I was able to get out here and transfer with, I was like 14 years ago, was I didn't need necessarily a visa process. And so that
you just went in and then started working.
I think I needed a visa briefly. So my story is I was asked to come out to interview people for we were about to open up IFC, and it was like our first store. For those who are listening, I used to work for Apple. And so I was like the only person they could find that spoke Cantonese.
Apple?
Like within our org, in leadership in our org. Like
really?
They looked pretty far and wide. And there wasn't a lot of Cantonese people and speaking people in our in retail.
But East Coast, New York or New Jersey, New York adjacent.
I don't know
area.
I know that
was it because of I would think the West Coast would have like tons of like Canto speaking people, right?
There were a lot of Canto speaking folks, but not necessarily in like leadership positions. And a lot of them were like like part timers. We ended up bringing a lot of those people out. It was really cool. But I came out just to like interview for 2 weeks, and then like after 2 weeks, they're like, "Can you stay for like 2 months?" And then like I was like, "Okay, I'll stay for 2 months." And then at the tail end of that, they're like, can you stay?" And at that time, I had already started, like my mom had come in and out of Hong Kong just to like, join the fact that I was in Asia. Yeah. And at that point, that was like only like my first or second time in Hong Kong ever. And at the time, since my mom was in town, we applied for we tried getting the 3 stars, and the Hong Kong government at the time was like, you
Cannot.
You needed both parents to be there.
And physically?
I think so. And then you need to present like their birth certificates, and my dad, being my dad, just wasn't gonna like drop working and like running the company and fly out to Hong Kong just to present like
a birth certificate.
Yeah. But that was like 15 years ago. But it was cool. They ended up bringing like a ton of Cantonese speakers, not just from the US, but they ended up bringing like a bunch of like other ABCs, BBCs, Australian-born Chinese, British-born Chinese. Like it was like my first experience interacting with people that have like a similar immigrant, like being
like
the first
Chinese first-gen immigrant. But in different countries, in English-speaking countries.
Yeah. Because before that, my extent, because I'm from the East Coast, like was mostly East Coast and maybe Toronto and maybe sometimes Vancouver was like my access.
Yeah.
At that point, I hadn't even really been on the West Coast before, so it was just like really, like I met somebody who grew up in Germany. So, like in English, they have like a very strong German accent.
Yeah,
they speak English, but then like their Chinese is just as bad as mine, but it's like from the same era and generation of parents that left. They like emigrated under duress for the same reason. So it was pretty surreal for me at the time to like.
Yeah, because you're seeing, I guess, the different lenses of that immigration or first gen. Wait, are we first gen or second gen?
We would be
technically.
I think we're considered first generation because
our parents moved across.
I think some people
set up shop.
Call it the other way, but
I've always thought of, or I was raised thinking I was first gen.
Same. I've heard of some people refer to my parents as the first generation, but in most of the stuff that I've read about or like the classes I took in college, they always refer to the first set of kids born outside of like their
out of the country.
Homeland. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I didn't think that I would spend more than like I thought it was just going to be like a 2-year stint and then I'll be like back in the U.S. I had no inclination that I would stay for as long as I have and like start to raise a family here. I imagine was it the same for you? Like,
oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I was actually here chasing an ex-girlfriend at that time, and then I had a secondment, a consulting gig that I transferred with KPMG back then, and didn't know, and then here I am 18 years later. So Hong Kong has its claws in it, like just kind of claws you in and sucks you in. And
for a lot of the things that are inconvenient about being an expat in Hong Kong, I think Hong Kong has been really an awesome place to live over the course of like the last 15 years.
Yeah,
in terms
absolutely.
Of our infrastructure and just, I don't have to worry about getting shot in the street. I've never felt unsafe walking around. Whereas I've been in dicey spots in like New York City.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, like in Chicago, I've been in shady areas, like South Side Chicago or West Side, where I used to live, and I had a loft condo. Like I was maybe like 5 blocks away from kind of a ghetto-ish area, and I would just not go that far west so that I would not be potentially shot.
Was it like a train tracks was what was dividing it? Was it like?
It was past California, so there's
like
So
Michigan Ave.
so there's California Avenue, and that west of that. So there's like Western, and then past California. That's where it started getting ghetto on the west side, I think. But that obviously that's changed. I mean, 18 years from now, it's different.
Do you find that it's like almost like familiar but unrecognizable when you go back? Like so much has changed.
For sure. I mean, I think Chicago. I mean, there's a lot of the same stuff, but like even these like little things, these like mom and pop shops. Like there used to be a Korean chicken place that in Chinatown that I used to go to constantly. It's no longer there because obviously they've gotten older.
Right.
That shop is older and the kids didn't carry it on. So there's a lot of things that where I feel I've been away from America long enough that it may no longer be really home in some senses, or like the adult home. So I associate it with growing up, right? From basically 0 to 29. But then sort of my core adult
memories,
key life-changing stuff is here, right?
So so the question that I wrestle with sometimes, because I it's the same, right? Like it's my main adulting years have been here with the occasional trip back and like you know. So I have 2 kids, you have 2 kids. And so like as you are raising kids in an expat bubble, like are you preparing your kids for a life in the East? Are you preparing your kids for a life in the West? Like, because those things, depending on a point, and you may not have one or like a fully fleshed out one, and I don't either, but some of those things will inform how we go about like raising our kids and the things that are like important to that. So like have you
I think so me and my wife I mean we're putting them in local school. Mila goes to the local kindergarten, Mateo goes to a local school, but it's English medium, but it's Mandarin is the primary Chinese that's being spoken, but there is still Canto. We are encouraging language, like to be multilingual. For the reason for kind of us being selfish in the sense that Ro and I are committed to being here for the unforeseeable future. I think the default is actually being like, okay, well, if you do, go ahead, go back to North America, whether it be Canada or US, you have that optionality. But we still see the opportunity set being here in Asia. So yeah, no, I think, but are they, is there Chinese like native? No, not really. So I think in some senses, at least my son would probably would be easier for him in an English speaking country, I think right now, but who knows, it might change, right? Like kids develop their, language skills at different paces. So
that's, it's interesting. Sometimes I worry that I'm not doing enough justice for my kids in the language department. And I think in particular, and this is my experience in Hong Kong, is like my mom and dad are from Hong Kong, but I grew up in the US and I'm an illiterate. Like I could speak enough Cantonese to like order food, but I'm more or less an illiterate, Chinese person.
Yeah.
And my wife's not Chinese, obviously. And so it's like this really, sometimes I feel embarrassed because Maddie doesn't really speak a lot of Cantonese, if much at all. She does Mandarin at school.
Okay.
Right, but sometimes I worry that with like if we were to continue here, then like if that's the case and we intend to stay here for us at least, like it's you need to be able to plug into like the cultural nuances, I think. And I think that, and you see this a lot of times with folks that did the reverse kind of culture commute where you've seen a lot of nowadays, in even in the business world, like most Chinese people you meet are able to flex and be able to switch and communicate in English. Like there isn't much of a world that exists that you have like in corporate Hong Kong, that like if you're from China, that you can't converse and do business in English. Like everyone,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not the other
absolutely.
way around. It's very seldomly the other way around.
Yeah.
But I think the things I imagine that they struggle with is even though you can speak the language, it doesn't necessarily mean you can plug in the same way and you have the same cultural like artifacts to like refer to. Like for example, if I say super soakers, like you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I found that was my struggle coming here, or at least my initial humbling moment moving to Hong Kong was I thought I was like the shit coming over here. Like I thought I spoke some Cantonese, right, and all that
So
stuff.
is that the stereotypical ABC, like roll in here like a single dude, you're gonna like, I'm gonna slay. I'm just gonna speak English and panties are gonna drop and
No, I
like...
thought my Chinese was great.
Oh, okay.
And then it turned out that like the first of all, the Chinese that I spoke when I moved here, to an extent now, like the context, and I don't know if anybody who's listening can relate, but like the Chinese that I learned was like a very deferential Chinese that's for like spoken at home.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like,
it's not.
and my parents moved in the 70s, so it's like the vernacular was like stuck in time
Okay.
to the 70s. And so when I moved out here, like people that obviously grew up here, they're like, nobody talks like that anymore. It's like almost like the equivalent.
Were you like reciting lines from Enter the Dragon, like 70s Bruce Lee movies, and then like they're like,
I'm saying it in
no.
I'm saying it in Chinese, but then it's dubbed under. There's a dub here. No, it's like it was like the equivalent. One, it was like the type of Chinese you would use for like grandparents and stuff like that. You're not going to use. It's not going to get you very far when you're trying to like talk to like somebody in their 20s or whatever.
Okay.
And like the references and like the language, and it's like almost like somebody today that's like using 70s vernacular from the US.
Groovy.
Yeah, disco.
You jive turkey. What's like the jive turkey equivalent to Encanto then? Let's see if there's a... No.
So I grew up I grew up that when you go to bed and you have family over or whatever, you say good night, and one of the things you say good night is just like this 周头, right? Which literal translation is like early rest, right?
Okay.
I thought that was a polite thing to do. I thought it was just essentially good night. And so when I first got here, and as I was ending my shifts, and I was saying like there was people hanging around, I would go around and be like 周头, good night, and people were like shocked that I would say that, or like
Really?
yeah.
I'm learning something new today. So because it's like too formal, or is it like...
Because the application in the work setting was almost like go home and rest, like go rest, like you're not doing a good job.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I didn't know
that's what it meant.
Yeah, so I was like walking around being like 周头, 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 and people were like, what the fuck? And like Chinese culture, they won't be like actually. It only took like for a couple months, some brave soul was like, that you're actually like could be offending them when you say that type of stuff. And I was like, oh,
interesting.
So my first year was really humbling for me in growing up here and moving over here. I was overly confident. I remember I was doing a recruiting seminar once, and I decided to try to wing it in Cantonese, and I butchered it so bad. It was just
oh no.
I mean, like, this was Apple, right? And so, like, you would think, and back then, like, the iPhone had just come out not long ago. It was like iPhone 4, so we're at like the peak of our...
Oh yeah, that's peak Apple. That's like, people...
Hell yeah.
Like selling it on the street, marking it up like 10 times or whatever. And
it's not like this anymore, but back then people were like, oh, like, what's it like to work at Apple? Can I get like, you know what I mean? It was almost like...
discount, or can I...
It was almost like you got into Stanford or like, you know what I mean? Back then. It's not like that so much, I don't think, anymore, but... So it was like all the, and it was like we're about to open up, and like there was some excitement there, but it bombed so bad because it's like it's such a my vocabulary is such it's so barbaric but polite. You know what I mean? Like it was.
Oh, interesting.
If I could be a fly in that, I get embarrassed just thinking about remembering.
So then there's like a kind of a, I'm sure there's like a double standard in that sense, right? Like the Chinese American, Hong Kong, like Canto,
Mm-hmm.
English, like you probably have to, I don't know, go either decide to be full on local, I guess, in the vernacular to kind of get into the culture, or you're just, or you associate with the to the expat side of things, right? Or some people kind of try to go navigate both sides, but I think it's hard to like do that fluidity. I guess.
That's a really good question. I think after 15 years in Hong Kong, as like someone that's like worked with local and expat teams and everything like that. I feel like the more I tried to force myself to be one or the other, like the more I struggled. And so like when I try to force myself to be like, oh, I'm going to immerse, I'm going to use the Chinese, I'm just going to do it. I'm like, did I improve? Yeah, sure, right. But like I meant, like again, it's not the vocabulary that was missing. It was like, it's like the overall package of having like the cultural access to be able to connect with people, right?
Okay.
But what's nice about Hong Kong is that it's not like you have zero tools. And so at some point I was like fuck this. I'm never going to be local Chinese, no matter how hard I tried, right? Yeah. And then on the other side, and this might get into some trouble here, but like I'm never going to be like the full on expat, in that an expat like who's not Chinese walks into a Chinese restaurant. There are just like unspoken understandings of what that interaction is going to look like. But my Cantonese is good enough. Sure. Okay. So like the most stressful place for me is to be in a taxi full of expats. Yeah. And I have to tell the taxi driver where to go, but I don't know how to, So anyway, I think where I found the most traction is people just want to be heard and understood, myself included. And I think that if I led with that first and say, hey, like, it's not going to be perfect how I speak. So like, but I can listen to Chinese better than I can speak it. Like, let's find a way that we can communicate well, because I want to understand you and you want to understand me. And the more that we're aligned in the workspace, then like the better we are. And most people, once you get rid of those rules, most people, if there is a mutual like kind of implicit agreement that that's what we want, most of the time, people are very forgiving. I'm very lucky in that. Most people are. So later on, I stopped trying to force myself to be like one or the other, because I'm not. Yeah. And my value in being here in Hong Kong, in my mind, would be diminished if I tried to be one or the other, or only one or only the other at a time. It's not genuine. Yeah. So knowing what Chinese values are, having grown up in a Chinese household, has helped me to influence things like policy in the workplace, because I understand the context. Some of my role was to like help expats understand how a local Chinese person may interpret something. And on the flip side, like it's almost like a bridge. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's different, I almost feel like Cantonese people have a hierarchy of preference of like different types of transient people that come through here, because like you've got
sure, I think there's for sure.
Yeah, you think there's a
okay, there's a stratification. There's like I think, I mean, not to offend anyone that's seeing this, but there's I think a preferential treatment sort of thing. Okay. Because like a white person versus a African versus a Indian, Hong Kong people will treat those people very different.
Yeah, or Filipino.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. I think it's.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think that Hong Kongers in general will, in terms of like that stratification, I think that they're bundles in term, not necessarily always based on race, but based off of expatriate. And within those bundles, then you'll have maybe like D&D sub races. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
like if you're a black guy in Hong Kong, but you're like an expat banker or an Indian banker,
You're still treated. I mean,
you're still an expat.
Yeah, it's still like almost like a caste system too, right? Like it depends on how much money you have. We'll treat
Right,
you,
right. So
we'll treat you with respect.
exactly,
Right?
like
it's
like Hong Kongers are known to be not necessarily like the best in terms of how they, on average, treat Filipinos.
yeah.
But that's because, like, by and large, like
Most of
the
their interaction is with helpers,
domestic
and-
helpers,
yeah.
right? So, but I actually, maybe it's a good question. Have you experienced like not racism, but like, you know what I mean, like negative experiences being a
Being
Filipino
Filipino
in Hong Kong?
as a family? No, actually, that's one thing that
So that's what I'm
we
saying.
haven't experienced. I would say I even haven't really experienced that much like sort
Yeah.
of racism at being Filipino in Hong Kong, but
All right.
I think it's because like when I open my mouth, it's pretty clear that I'm like
Yeah. So
coconut. But then I'm physically like right now I'm super dark, right? So there's also the sort of how they see people like by their skin tone. So I think I would say probably my wife has experienced probably more on the surface level being a Filipino woman.
interesting.
Because they'll see brown skinned woman and they'll just have
Automatically
certain like security guards or other things like in buildings and stuff, they just make certain assumptions. They don't
That's
they don't
true.
think. And is it racist, or is it just because that's 99% of what they've seen is like this people
Yeah.
so I would say it's hard to like.
Maybe it's more socioeconomical.
Yeah, I think there's a factor of that, and that's where it makes it
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Yeah, my wife's gone through. I remember so like obviously this Filipina,
Yeah.
that. So there have been times where like I may have received a delivery at home, and I'm like, did I get it yet? And they're like, oh, I gave it to your helper.
Oh, and
Because like what they see is like a non-Chinese person, presumably Filipina, open the
woman
door,
open the door. Yeah,
and I had to be like, that's not my helper. That's my wife.
Hong Kong, in some senses, it's not about they're all racist and they're all discriminatory. They hate on each other too. So it's kind of a equal opportunity hate all around. Like that's what I've learned in the last 18 years, right? It's like not necessarily about the one type or another or anything. It's like they're just grumpy, right? Like a taxi driver
Equally grumpy.
is just equal. He doesn't give a fuck. He's just angry, right? Like, and you can interpret it in two different ways. You can like really take it in and be like, oh, he hates me because of what I am or what it is, or you can look at it like, oh well, he's not making his fare and he's angry at everyone. Right? So I don't know. I think it's a tough topic.
I want to disagree with you, but I do agree that there's a certain part of like the Cantonese ethos that's like a very cranky, like, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
grumpy.
Cranky motherfuckers, man. Like,
Yeah.
like whenever you travel, okay, when you were back home in
Yeah.
the U.S.,
Yeah.
and then you spent some time back home, and then you come back here and you hop onto a taxi, like there's a night and day difference of how a taxi driver would address you or an Uber
Yes.
versus how you would be here.
But I will submit a counter argument. Okay.
All right.
So in the sales and service industry, though, you get much better service here in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
you buy a coffee from here. It could be a Starbucks. It could be a little like corner shop. It could be whatever. Versus the type of interactions I have experienced just going to a Starbucks in the U.S. night and day.
Really?
Night and day.
I mean, even with sort of the tipping, like regular restaurants, like
I think-
not high end, but like let's just say mid level restaurant.
I think that there is a maybe because Hong Kong has been known as like a retail hub for so many years. Like think about like all the brands we have over here in the past. Like Hong Kong was like the place to go to buy tech.
Yeah.
Like gray market or like
Yeah.
So I do think that there's a cultural standard that comes with like what you can expect from like a service perspective. Like if you buy a cup of coffee, if it would be very jarring for me if like the person at a Starbucks was like nasty
Oh yeah.
in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? Like you get
Yeah.
your coffee, they're like, here, thank you, like here you go, right? But like in the US, if it's not borderline, like they're almost annoyed that they're serving. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the attitude.
Hey, what do you like? What do you want? And like, I mean, that's part of like the charm of New York for me, like in New Jersey, right? Like, maybe it's just more genuine to a degree, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely like Flying Cathay versus United is night
I mean,
and
that
day.
is night and day difference for sure.
Objectively, they're all just ground staff and like crew, but
the cranky level, yeah, that okay.
right, like there are there are some differences, but in general, yes, like the ambient, unfiltered Cantonese ethos involves a good deal of crankiness. I would admit that would be the case. Sometimes it's cool though. You go to like the local noodle shops, and you got that angry lady, like, what do you want?
The suit Nazi type of lady.
It's so true, though, because you know that place is good.
It's good. It's good. The angrier the
100%.
the lady.
100%. If
Really?
the angrier and grumpier and packed the place is, I'm like, the food is amazing. It's going to be amazing. Because like there's no way you can sustainably do business if you're relying purely on, if it was
the way that she talked to you and whatever, right? Okay,
yeah.
that makes sense.
The place is like moderately empty and they're overly nice to you, I'm more worried that the food is going to be bad.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
They're like for local joints.
Yeah.
Local joints. But I think there are restaurants in the US where they're like intentionally mean to you.